Hey everybody, this is Perch. There's been some conversation over the last, I would say week, but it's actually been going on for a couple months now, as people are trying to ascertain what's going on in the comics space. And so Scott Snyder just recently posted that he's hearing that there's a lot of enthusiasm, hearing that there's a lot of people who are buying comics. The comic stores are actually healthier than normal, and this is great news, right? And then meanwhile, you see a number of kind of videos and tweets and other things saying, the American comic industry is dying. And then you've got manga in there and you've got Scholastic in there. So you've got a bunch of moving parts. So how do you pull them together? Well, I think there's an easy answer to all this. I think there is a definitive answer we can point to. The challenge here, and I'll put this up front, is that we have scarce numbers, but they're out there. If you dig hard enough and you either have the right relationships or you look at the right place, or if you're just a student of history, one of the, any, data, mass statisticians, anyone who studies trends will tell you the exact same thing. It is extremely, extremely rare for there to be dramatic changes in data. And when I say extremely rare, I mean less than 1% of the time. Now you may say to yourself, well, wait a minute, what about a stock market crash? Well, if you talk to any investor or you talk to anybody who actually looks at the stock market, they will tell you the same thing, which is you don't look at, day by day. If you're a day trader, sure, you can do that. But the way you do is you back up, you look at the year view, 3-year view, 5-year view, and you look at trends. And if you look at that, what you'll notice is things look a lot more smooth. You'll see stocks rising, you'll see stocks sinking, but you don't pay attention to the day-by-day swings of anything. And that's really important. And if you've looked at all of the comics numbers videos, they all paint a very consistent picture. You have trends. You certainly have inciting events, like you'll have a relaunch where it seems to interrupt things and you get a brief sales spike, but then it goes back down to where it normally is. Everything tends to have a very consistent trend. It's extremely rare that you have just things fall off a cliff. Again, 1% or less. And we're not living in that now for comics. So what's going on with comics? Well, it is a true fact that there was an expectation that more comic book shops would close in 2020 than actually closed. Now, the reason people thought that was because we had the pandemic, we had forced closures, you had a bunch of comic shops that had not, moved to any kind of online store sales that were a little bit old-fashioned in their approach, and retail in general is trending down, meaning trending dying, for lack of a better word. People are shopping more online. We see Amazon profits trending up. And so there was an expectation that this pandemic and the closure of the shops and everything else would cause a big hiccup in big drop in comic shops closing. And there are a bunch of numbers mentioned. I myself expected more comic shops to close. And I wasn't expecting that because of any quality of American comics or anything else. I was expecting that for two reasons. Retail slowing down, pandemic shutting shops with a very tight margin. However, that hasn't really happened. We've definitely seen some comic stores close. We haven't seen a lot of new ones open up. There's been a few, but not many. We've definitely lost some stores, but what I think a lot of people are throwing around a number of about 20 to 25% of shops would go out as an estimate. And to be clear, they were saying that same number around dress shops and everything. Restaurants. The restaurant industry did get beaten up pretty hard. But comic shops seem to have, if I was doing a back of the math estimation, it would be somewhere around 5 to 10% went out of business, which is much lower. And really that's on par with what we see every year. The only difference is we haven't seen new shops open up, including mine, because a lot of people are waiting for things to settle down. They're worried about states rolling back restrictions. And so I know I'm in a number of retailer groups on Facebook and other places, and there's at least a dozen of us that are all waiting to open our shop until things stabilize a little bit. I think in the second half of the year we're going to see more shops open, and then I think that number is going to be probably around 5%, maybe even a little lower. So what happened? Did suddenly the comics get amazingly good? No, for the same reason that the comic shop stayed open. That we didn't lose as many. It's because, one, comic shops have less costs. that a lot of the PPP protection and retailer protection helped out, that there wasn't a lot of overhead for comic shops to have to deal with. And that was probably the biggest reason. People on Twitter and a lot of responses to Snyder is like, well, it's because we had renewed interest because everybody was stuck at home and reading comics. Well, maybe. I'm not so convinced that is the answer, because frankly, if people are stuck at home and they're reading comics, then we should have seen a big upswing in trade sales and other things on Amazon, because that's the number one place people are going to go when they're stuck at home. We didn't see that. We see a couple sales boost, but we didn't see a big jump in graphic novel sales via Amazon. So what's more likely is that these shops had one or two employees and they were able to just kind of hunker down and survive. They basically trimmed their costs and they did okay. I do think it forced a couple people to do things they should have been doing already, which is having some online sales and being able to, upgrade their delivery system. And I think that in turn also boosted some sales, because a lot of shops were missing out on that money, and now they're suddenly able to get it. So I think that was a factor as well. I don't think it had that much to do with the actual content. Because if it did, then you would have seen different numbers in, say, March, April, and May, when a lot was shut down and people were very confused and comics weren't even shipping for most of those months, certainly not from Marvel. So I think this has a lot more to do with costs. Again, these are my estimates. Maybe I'm way off, but the content doesn't add up for either. It doesn't tell us a picture that comics are absolutely terrible and people are running from them, or that they got amazing and people are running to them. None of the numbers support either of those pictures. The other thing that did happen is that, as we've been talking about, manga had a resurgence in the last year. Now, why is that? Who knows? Maybe because the pandemic was on, maybe because it became an easy way to binge a lot of content. If you ask me, and I had to bet on it, I would say that viewing behavior around things like Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on, this idea of binging a show became popular for reading. And manga makes it very easy to pick up 10, 20 volumes of a thing all at once. It's an easily bingeable piece of material. The big two are not that way. It's go onto Amazon and then try and figure out which 5 volumes, which 5 trades of Spider-Man you need to order to give you a nice sequential story of Spider-Man. It was incredibly hard to do that. Manga is very easy. You go My Hero Academia, I want volume 1, and then when you put that in your cart, it's like, would you like volume 2? And you're like, yes, and then volume 3 and volume 4 and volume 5, and you're done. It's very easy. It's hard with Batman and Spider-Man and all these other things. What has also been said anecdotally in these retailer groups is that the high end, meaning things like, death metal, meaning things like King in Black, those comics seem to sell a little bit better. That makes sense if you think about it. It means that people who are maybe tight on cash or not sure exactly what to buy, they're going to go for the most heavily promoted, biggest thing, because the comic publishers are telling them this is the important one, so I should buy it. We're also seeing that the lower end, the things that are selling in the 5,000 to, in that kind of zone, increased. Things that were selling 5,000 are now selling 8 to 10. You're seeing a lot of indie artists celebrate, saying, I'm getting higher sales than I've gotten in the past. Well, this makes sense too, because now with everybody shut in, it's allowing people to maybe promote a little bit more, and people are able to kind of tug on the heartstrings to say, hey, I've got a comic out. It's new. It's an indie little effort. Why don't you, help? It's why you're seeing things like Noctera and Decorum and Department of Truth, and you're seeing these indie comics from big name creators spike very high first issues. Well, again, it makes sense. They're able to have the time to promote a little bit more directly what they're doing. You do notice these titles tend to drop off relatively quickly, so maybe that first issue sales bump is a little fictional long term, but it's still, all these things make sense. What seems to be negatively impacted is the middle tier, and I'm talking everything from about 15,000 to 50,000, kind of in that zone of comics. we're seeing, at least from other retailers, what I hear consistently is those titles have dropped about 10 to 20%. And this has hit things like the X-Men line, the Avengers line, some of the new DC books are all negatively impacted. And I think that makes sense too, because again, your money is going to the big name things, or maybe the individual projects that at the indie level that the artists or the writers are promoting, and people are just less interested in the middle ground. And by the way, you see DC and Marvel reacting to this already. You see them introducing more miniseries, more events, more things to kind of promote the top level. It's not by accident they're doing that. This is a reaction to what's going on in the market. The other thing that seems higher is back issue trade. People are investing more in back issues, and I think that's a combination of looking for something to read, and it's also a combination of the shows that are mining these events and these past things more. And so I think the combination of all of that is increasing the back issue trade. I don't think this lasts, but I think it's a brief moment in time where we're getting that. I don't believe, and I know that's a theory of a lot of people, I don't believe that the back issues doing better is a result of people going, I don't like woke politics in current comics, therefore I'm going to buy back issues. Again, that doesn't exactly add up. If you just think about it psychologically, those people would be more likely to opt out completely, not say, I hate the direction the Avengers have gone in, so I'm going to go back 10 years and buy Avengers comics. That just doesn't. That's not normal customer behavior. If they do feel that way, they're probably much more likely to, maybe fill in some holes of their previous collection that they're already collecting, but go in the way of manga and other things. The other factor here for comic shops is that they have diversified their business. They're selling manga for the first time in many cases. There's a lot of retail shops that are ordering manga they didn't before. There's a lot of retail shops that are giving more attention to indies, and because they know how to market it for their audience that's buying their comics. So there's a lot of changes that are going on where that's concerned. The problem with this whole discussion is that it becomes a dunk fest. A lot of comic professionals bring this up as a way to say, ha ha ha, see, you said it's all dying, but things are going great, which is just kind of childish. What does that prove? The proof is in the numbers. Sell your comic, make a lot of money. That proves your critics wrong. That is the number one thing that proves your critics wrong. Dan Slott has been able to prove a lot of his critics wrong when he was on Spider-Man because he was putting up big numbers. So people are saying you're writing garbage, and Dan Slott's like, my comic is selling over 100,000 copies. So, that's kind of a mic drop moment if he can do that. The problem is that's how you want to win the fight. If you're trying to win the fight by saying anecdotally, I hear comic shops are doing better and it must be because of me, it just sounds ridiculous. At the same time, yes, it is ridiculous for people to say the entire Western comic market is dying. It's because it's a losing argument, because the Western comic market, and I'm giving air quotes that you can't see, it's big. And it's nebulous, and there's a lot of pieces to it. And so unless you get a little bit more specific about what exactly is dying, you're going to just get torn apart by counter arguments. So that's why the specifics matter. Anyway, there you go. There's an answer. It's a nuanced answer, but that's what's happening, whether you like it or not, or that's what's going on, for what it's worth. Let me know your comments below or any questions you have. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.